So in this video, we are going to take a look at the situation between Iran and Iraq. Let's start with a little bit of framing. The new Iraqi prime minister, we've talked about him a little bit. I made a few videos over the last month about him. He was basically sort of handpicked by President Trump, meaning President Trump essentially vetoed the previous choice. And this guy was then chosen. He was a political outsider. He's someone who seems to be very concerned with the well-being of Iraq, which is a refreshing change. And he visited the White House very recently. And his real goal is to consolidate Iraq and get rid of all of the outside influence. And we're going to get into that more in a bit and about how complicated that is. But what I really want to focus on for the first part of this video mainly is how Iran is terrified right now of losing their grip on Iraq. You know, Iran has had control of the political landscape in Lebanon for a very long time. We know about that and what's going on there now. Joseph Aoun, the president of Lebanon, is in Washington today, meeting with President Trump, and we know what's going on there, trying to get rid of Hezbollah so that Lebanon has its own sovereignty back and its independence back, and we get the Iranian influence out of there. Of course, with the fall of the Assad regime, Iran lost their influence over that country. There's now all this pressure now on the Houthis in Yemen. And the Iranians are struggling to keep their axis of resistance together. And Iraq is a major piece of the puzzle for them. And it's a complicated piece because unlike these other countries, it's also a Shiite majority country, which complicates things in terms of getting rid of Iranian influence. Okay, so let's get through. I'm going to pull up a whole bunch of stories here from the last few days, and we're going to get through them. And we'll get a picture of what the dynamics are right now with the efforts of Iran to keep Iraq in its orbit and the efforts being made by Iraq to extract itself from the Iranian orbit without creating a civil war internally. That's what we're looking at in this video. That's where we're going. And I want to thank a viewer, someone who's a viewer of this channel, who pointed out a Chrome extension that could help me, which highlights pieces of articles, so that when I'm reading and I don't want to read the full article and I'm searching around, which if you watch this channel, I do it a lot, I could have the articles highlighted. Now, I'm not a very technologically advanced person, a bit of a Luddite in many ways. And if any of you have other technical pieces of advice for me to make these videos better, I appreciate it. But I really thank whoever that viewer was who made that suggestion in one of the comments that I should get this. And he gave me the name of the Chrome extension. And I went ahead and installed it, and I'm just thrilled. So thank you, whoever you are. I don't remember. I was in a comment in a recent video, and I think we're all grateful to you. Here we go. Let's get to it. So this is from July 19th. So this is 2 days ago. Leader appreciates Iraqi's million-strong funeral procession for standard bearer of resistance. Now, this is an article in Tasnim. This is Iranian state media, and this is the IRGC media outlet, the more hardline. They're all hardline, but this is the IRGC's outlet. And the purpose of this article is to express gratitude, is for Mojtaba Khamenei, the fake dead or incapacitated leader, supreme leader, to express gratitude to the Iraqi turnout for the funeral, because the funeral procession of Ali Khamenei also went into Iraq. Now, why did it go into Iraq? Not just because there's a lot of Shiites there, but the origin of Shiite Islam is actually in Iraq, in Karbala. It's a famous battle that took place in Karbala, and that's where Imam Ali, the founder of Shiite Islam, was killed. So it passed through Iraq, and there were, it says here, million-strong funeral procession for the standard bearer of resistance. And this entire article, almost entirely after this brief opening paragraph, is the full text of a message that was issued on July 17th, 2026, to the Iraqi people from Mojtaba Khamenei, or from whoever is writing things in his name. I'm just going to read you one excerpt of it so you get a sense of it. This unprecedented million-strong funeral procession for the standard bearer of the resistance vividly demonstrated the full extent of the empathy, brotherhood, and solidarity that exists between the two nations of Iraq and Iran. Undoubtedly, the leaders of global arrogance, capitalized, that's America, witnessed the magnificent scenes of this massive gathering in Iraq with trepidation, seeing how the vast resources they've invested to undermine relations between the two nations have proved entirely futile and ineffective. You see what he's saying here? This paragraph has a political spin on it, right? He's saying that your big turnout was a message to the Americans who were trying to separate us, who were trying to drive a wedge between Iraq and Iran. The correct way to put it is they're trying to get Iranian influence out. Parenthetical statement. Everyone accuses Israel of being an occupier and a colonizer, which is just absurd. And the biggest occupier and colonizer in the Middle East over the last 40 years is the Iranians. They occupied and colonized Lebanon. They occupied and colonized Iraq. They actually, for the most part, occupied and colonized Syria, because the Bashar al-Assad regime in the last 20 years, or even for sure the last decade plus, has been so weak that it's basically become a proxy. It became a proxy of the Iranian regime. But they really have so much control in Iraq and Lebanon that they're basically colonies. They're basically occupied. Anyway, so here he's saying that this is, this really showed the Americans that this turnout of tens of millions in both Iran and Iraq for the funeral and farewell ceremony of the martyred Mujahid, meaning a holy warrior, Imam, may his noble station be elevated, has opened a new chapter of awakening and active engagement aimed at altering the equations that had been designed by the arrogant powers. The great Satan, the criminal United States, has now revealed that the continuation of its trouble-free domineering presence in the region is nothing but a naive fantasy. So he's saying that the turnout of the Iraqis was pushed back against the Americans. And then we have this next piece, which is also from the 19th, from the same day. Look at this news item. This is from the same day, a few hours later. Iran and Iraq discuss regional de-escalation. The foreign ministers of Iran and Iraq talked about the latest regional developments following the U.S. military aggression against Iran, Washington's repeated violations of the Islamabad MOU, and the need for continued consultations to promote regional stability. In a telephone conversation on Saturday evening, a few days ago, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and his Iraqi counterpart, Fuad Hussein, discussed the latest regional developments in the wake of U.S. military aggression against Iran, Washington's repeated breaches of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, and Iran's response to those hostile actions. Araghchi described the relations between Iran and Iraq as deeply rooted, strategic, and founded on profound historical, cultural, religious, and shared national interests, emphasizing this shared cultural, religious identity, which is the same theme of this letter from the supreme leader to the Iraqi people. They're trying to remind and emphasize, to the Iraqi people, the Iraqi Shiites, that they're really one nation. You see what they're worried about. He also stressed that the valuable ties between the two neighboring countries should not be affected by certain personal and unofficial remarks. The Iranian foreign minister reaffirmed Tehran's commitment to mutual respect, good neighborly relations, and the further expansion of ties with the Iraqi government and people. The two foreign ministers also reviewed the dimensions of the ongoing regional developments and their implications for regional security and stability. They underscored the importance of maintaining bilateral consultations and coordination to prevent further escalation of tensions and safeguard regional peace and security. Okay, that is, that's the lay of the land there. So let's go to the next story. So you see what they're doing here. They're worried about losing their influence. And on the very same day, a third story, all on the same day in Tasnim, 3 stories about Iraq all in one day. All Iran-Iraq border crossings open for Arbaeen pilgrims, official. So the head of Iran's central headquarters for Arbaeen. Arbaeen is the day that, well, we're going to describe what it is in a bit. It's a holiday for Shiites, a very important one. The head of Iran's central headquarters for Arbaeen announced that all border crossings leading to Iraq are fully operational and prepared to facilitate the entry and exit of pilgrims traveling to attend the Arbaeen pilgrimage. Speaking to reporters on Sunday, Ali Akbar, Purjamshidian, and the Shalamsheh said the Shalamsheh, Shazabeh, Mehran, Khosravi, Bashmak, and Tamarchin border crossings in western Iran are fully ready to accommodate pilgrims heading to Iraq for the Arbaeen pilgrimage, adding that no major obstacles exist to their travel. I'm jumping down. Arbaeen, one of the world's largest annual religious gatherings, marks the 40th day after Ashura, the anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein Ali, the third Imam of the Shiite Muslims. Every year, millions of pilgrims from Iran and across the world travel to the Iraqi holy city of Karbala to commemorate the occasion at the shrine of Imam Hussein. To facilitate the pilgrimage, Iran and Iraq have expanded bilateral coordination through a series of agreements aimed at easing travel procedures, removing visa restrictions for pilgrims, improving transportation and public services, strengthening medical and logistical support, and enhancing security at border crossings. I'm wondering how many Iranians are going to cross over and try not to come back and go from Iraq elsewhere to get out of Iran. This should be interesting. It's going to be, it's in August at some point. It's August 4th. Okay, so these are 3 stories in one day, all about, the cooperation and the cultural affinity and the religious affinity between Iraq and Iran. And then on the very next day, July 20th, which is yesterday, we have Iraqi resistance warns we will intervene directly if aggression against Iran escalates. The Islamic resistance in Iraq has issued a stark warning to the United States, declaring it will directly enter the conflict and target all American bases and interests across the region if hostilities against Iran escalate. I don't know what they're waiting for. They seem to be kind of escalating. In an official statement released on Monday, the Iraqi Resistance Coalition cautioned Washington against expanding its current military operations targeting Iranian territory. The group stated that should American aggression continue or intensify, it will transition into a direct confrontation with what it termed the American enemy. Furthermore, the Islamic resistance in Iraq emphasized that any wider conflict involving Iran would immediately place all U.S. military bases and strategic assets, both within Iraq and throughout the broader Middle East, in its direct line of fire. Now, what's interesting about this dynamic is, we're going to see this in a moment, is that the efforts to disarm the various militias in Iraq that the new prime minister is engaged in, some of these militias are saying that they're only going to give up their weapons once the Americans are gone. But the Americans aren't going to leave. It's a game of chicken. The Americans aren't going to leave if these militias are still running around. So it's a bit of a game of chicken. We'll see how it plays out. And then we have this story from yesterday, from late yesterday. U.S. soldier killed and 1 injured. U.S. soldier killed and 1 injured after Iranian attack in Iraq. The U.S. military says a service member was killed after an Iranian attack in northern Iraq on Saturday, a day after the attack on a base in Jordan that killed 2 U.S. soldiers. So we had a U.S. soldier who was killed in Iraq the other day, which does not bode well. And then we have this story. This is actually a week old, but it's very relevant to this to give us more of the background information. Al-Zaidi's government tests Iran's influence in Iraq. Iran is facing challenges in Iraq that it has not encountered in years. Iraq's new government, led by Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi, this guy, has declared its intention to bring all weapons under state control while pursuing closer relations with Washington, just like in Lebanon, as Tehran and its allies come under mounting regional and U.S. pressure. Iran's influence in Iraq built up since the 2003 US-led invasion, extends far beyond armed factions. Over more than 2 decades, listen to this. This is describing the Iranian influence in Iraq that we're talking about. Over more than 2 decades, Tehran has cultivated an extensive network of ties with political parties, economic institutions, and security agencies, making any assessment of its waning influence more complex than simply counting the armed groups that have so far agreed to surrender their weapons and integrate into Iraqi state institutions. Understand what this just said. This is what Iran does in these countries, just like in Lebanon. In Lebanon, it's not just that there's this Hezbollah militia that needs to be disarmed. Hezbollah is also a party in the government. They're part of the economic institutions, the banks, the political parties, the security agencies. It's all intertwined. Hezbollah's in all of it. It's not so easy to dislodge the Iranians. Zaidi's moves, coupled with his first visit to Washington this week, test whether shifting regional dynamics and sustained U.S. pressure have begun to erode Iran's position in Iraq, or whether Tehran can preserve its influence by relying more heavily on its political, economic, and security networks. Zaidi held 2 separate meetings in late June. I found this really interesting. Listen up to this. Zaidi held 2 separate meetings in late June with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Quds Force Commander Ismail Kha'ani. Now, the Quds Force is the part of the IRGC that is basically the proxies. Okay, that's what the Quds Force is. It's the proxy network. So he met with the foreign minister and with Ismail Kha'ani. This new prime minister did. Iraqi sources close to both the prime minister and the ruling coordination framework told MBN last week. According to the sources, both meetings became tense over the issue of Iran-backed armed factions and weapons outside state control. The sources said Zaidi rejected any external interference in Iraq's security affairs during his meeting with Araghchi, asking the Iranian official, "Would you accept me interfering in your security affairs or establishing armed factions inside your country?" He argued that the continued existence of weapons outside state institutions undermines Iraq's sovereignty and its foreign relations. Zaidi delivered the same message to Kha'ani, the head of the Quds Force, urging Iran to support Iraqi state institutions rather than armed factions as part of his effort to ensure that all weapons fall under government authority before the U.S.-led international coalition concludes its mission in Iraq in September, right? Because the United States is officially, the timeline is that the United States is going to pull out of Iraq in September, but they want to make sure that Iraq is secure when they pull out. Iraq holds significant strategic value for Iran in security, political, and economic terms. The 2 countries share a border of more than 1,400 kilometers. That's 870 miles. Iraq is one of Iran's largest trading partners, and Tehran views its influence there as a cornerstone of its regional security strategy and its ability to counter the United States and its allies. And it's a Shiite majority country, one of the only ones in the world. Washington has also imposed sanctions on Iraqi government officials, including a deputy oil minister, accusing him of using his position to facilitate the diversion of Iraqi oil shipments for Iran's benefit. The Zaidi government has made the issue of weapons outside state control one of its top priorities. It says it has reached understandings with As-Saib al-Haq and the Imam Ali brigades to place military formations affiliated with the 2 groups under government authority and further integrate them into state institutions. So 2 of the Shiite armed groups, they've made arrangements with them to, that they're going to become part of the Iraqi military. However, it remains unclear how these agreements will be implemented. The government has not discussed what weapons would be surrendered or which units would be restructured, leaving open questions about whether the initiative represents a meaningful shift or merely a limited administrative reorganization. And they go further. Iran's influence in Iraq is not limited to armed organizations. Over the years, Tehran has built close relationships with political parties, parliamentary blocs, influential figures within state institutions. I mentioned this earlier, alongside extensive commercial, financial, and religious networks stretching from Baghdad to Iraq's southern provinces and border regions, meaning the whole country. Meanwhile, several major Iran-backed armed factions continue to reject plans to place all weapons under state control, insisting that any such step must be tied to the withdrawal of international coalition forces from Iraq, scheduled for September. In other words, they're saying we're not leaving until the international, we're not giving up our weapons. We're not even going to discuss it until the Americans are gone. Among the most prominent are Kataib Hezbollah and Harakat al-Nujaba, both designated by the United States as terrorist organizations and considered key pillars of the Iran-led Axis of Resistance. That's Axis of Resistance is Iran's name for the proxy network. So these are two major pieces of the proxy network, Harakat al-Nujaba and Kataib Hezbollah, and they're refusing to disarm. The groups argue that Iraq remains subject to an unacceptable U.S. military presence and say they will not surrender their weapons before foreign forces leave the country. Their opposition presents an early test for al-Zaidi's government. While it's seeking to convince Washington that it can enforce state authority, it also relies politically on a governing coalition that includes parties with direct ties to the same factions it's trying to disarm. This dynamic could encourage Tehran to avoid a direct confrontation with the Iraqi government in the near term, meaning the Iranians might sit back because they don't want to have this confrontation. And they don't want to, stir up the ire of Trump on this point. Instead, focusing on buying time, preserving its political and economic influence, and waiting for Washington's priorities to shift. And preserving their political influence comes in the form of things like issuing a letter to the people, thanking them for being at the funeral, talking about how we're gonna de-escalate and how the borders are going to be open for Arbaeen, right? This is the types of things that they're doing. So you see how complicated this is. Now, I want to remind you that when al-Zaidi was meeting with President Trump, and he made this statement about the militias, about them disarming, he said, once the Americans are gone, you have no real basis for existing as a resistance force, because the whole concept in theory of these Iranian resistance forces is that they're fighting the great Satan and the little Satan. So Hezbollah's purpose is to fight Israel, for example, right? That's their purpose. And ostensibly Kataib Hezbollah and these, the other Iranian-backed factions, their ostensible purpose is to fight the Americans who are there. And al-Zaidi said, once the Americans are gone, you have no reason to still have your weapons because the Americans are gone. Who are you fighting? It's going to be interesting to see where this goes. And then we have this piece. This is also from last week. Iran reinforces border with Iraq amid fears of Kurdish action. So this is another dynamic here. It's not just about the Shiites in Iraq being within the Iranian orbit and some of them being literal proxies of Iran. But we also have the Kurdish issue that's going on there. Iranian Kurdish opposition parties say that the IRGC has deployed thousands of troops and heavy weapons to areas near the border with Iraq's Kurdistan region in recent weeks, in what they believe is preparation for a possible confrontation with Kurdish fighters amid the escalating conflict between Iran and the United States. Opposition officials say the buildup includes roughly 3,000 troops from the IRGC's Sabarin Special Forces Brigade, along with units from the Guard's ground forces and aerospace force. They said the troops were deployed in phases to border areas over the past several weeks. According to Iranian Kurdish parties, 6 fighters from the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan were killed in early July in an ambush carried out by the IRGC near the city of Piranshah in Iran's West Azerbaijan province. Another Kurdish grouping, the Kurdistan Free Life Party, said 4 of its fighters were killed in Mahabad in late June, and the Kurdistan Freedom Party said one of its members was assassinated by Iran in Erbil during the same month. Now, the reason I read this little passage here is take a look at what we have here. We have the Kurdistan Free Life Party and the Kurdistan Freedom Party. They're not the same. And then we have the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan. That's another one. There are, well, we'll read on. We'll see. We'll talk about this a little more. There's too many of these groups. Since mid-June, opposition parties said the IRGC has intensified operations against local villagers who spend the summer moving their livestock through the mountainous border region in search of grazing land. And on July 10th, a young Kurdish shepherd was killed by the IRGC right near the border. Now, look, here's the problem. On February 22nd, about a week before the outbreak of the war involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, 6 prominent Iranian Kurdish organizations announced the formation of a political and military alliance opposing the Islamic Republic. The alliance said its objective was to defend what it described as the Kurdish people's right to self-determination. Now, why are there 6 different Iranian Kurdish organizations? This is the problem. Okay, God bless the Kurds. But you know why they don't have an independent state? Because all the way back when the Sykes-Picot Agreement was being worked out in the San Remo Conference after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in the 1920s, when the British and French were carving up the Middle East and setting up different countries and drawing lines on a map and creating all these states, the Kurds couldn't get their act together because they had so much internecine fighting that they couldn't decide who represented them, and they ended up not being part of the deal. And this has been the undoing of the Kurdish people for a long, long time. There are, look at that, 6 different anti-Iran Kurdish groups had to make an alliance, but then it says Kurdish opposition leaders had previously told MBN that the alliance has not yet launched coordinated military operations inside Iran. Its efforts have so far focused on political coordination, while each party continues to conduct its own armed activities and political campaigns against the government. They can't get their act together. It's part of the problem there with them. But you see that Iran is building up forces on the Iraqi border. And finally, 3 explosive, this is from just a couple of hours ago, folks, today, 3 explosive-laden drones said shot down near the U.S. consulate in Iraq's Erbil. 3, right? There you go. That was reported by Reuters. Iraq is heating up as a theater. Iraq is very complicated. The prime minister is in power as a result of being acceptable / chosen by a Shiite bloc that is actually favorable to Iran. But now he's trying to get rid of the Iranian influence. He's trying to rein in the militias without inflaming things. And the Iranians are trying very hard to keep Iraq in its orbit and keep it under its influence and keep the population loyal to it. These are the dynamics going on in Iraq, and it is it's a very important story in this whole narrative of where the Middle East is going. It's very, very important. Iraq is a huge country. It's a very strategically located country. It borders on everybody. It borders on Turkey and Syria and Jordan and Iran and Azerbaijan. It borders on everyone. Very strategically located, very important, lots of natural resources, lots of oil. They also open out onto the Gulf, onto the Persian Gulf. I mean, Iraq is a very important country, and it's one of these narratives that is unfolding as part of the dominoes that are falling with the degradation of the Iranian regime that we need to keep an eye on. And that's why we're on this channel. That's why we come to this channel. That's why I do what I do, to make sure that we have a comprehensive understanding of what's happening in the Middle East, that we're not just focusing on the main ring of the circus and having this kind of tunnel vision. Like you watch the news, it's all Straits of Hormuz, Donald Trump, Iran. And we need to make sure that we understand what all the different shifting dynamics are. And as you see, if you watch all these videos, if you're watching my channel, you see that it's very complicated. These countries are being pulled in different directions, and it's not so simple to extract the Iranian influence from a country like Iraq. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful. Please give me some comments. I do, as you see from the beginning of this video, I do read the comments. I find them helpful. I appreciate them. I appreciate all of you for helping grow this channel. And yeah, we'll leave it there. God bless.